In the near future, a devastating virus wipes out 99% of humanity. The last 513 survivors are forced to live on a small island in the Baltic Sea, as the rest of the world has become uninhabitable. On this isolated refuge, a woman gives birth, and the community gathers to celebrate. But amid the joy, a somber ritual unfolds. Her father prepares to say his final goodbye. Accompanied by loved ones, he walks to the island's highest cliff, where a journalist captures the moment, narrating the grim reality. As new life begins, an old one must end. Following the island's strict survival laws, the grandfather sacrifices himself so that his granddaughter may live. Moments later, a second cry echoes through the house. A second child is born. This unexpected birth creates an immediate crisis. Helgoland has rigid population control laws. No more than 513 people can live at a time. If a baby is born outside the planned cycle, someone must volunteer or be forced to jump. Beatrice, the island's leader, enforces a strict ranking system. Good deeds raise your status, mistakes lower it. The person at the bottom of the list is the first in line for elimination. Despite the community's illusion of democracy, every major decision comes down to a vote. This time, the island's news report highlights the lowest-ranked individuals. Among them is number 511, a young man and a friend of Beatrice's son, who tries to make light of the grim situation, joking that refusal to jump won't save him from being thrown off. Number 512 is an elderly woman deemed unproductive. But the lowest of all, number 513, is Etienne, a man who has fallen out of favor due to past transgressions. Life on the island moves forward. Dr. Merrick, the community's scientist, works tirelessly in his laboratory alongside his son, Linus, searching for a cure for the virus that ended civilization. Linus believes their only hope lies on the mainland, where resources might still exist. But his father is adamant. It's far too dangerous. Supplies come from those who have somehow adapted to the wasteland, and venturing there is a death sentence. Merrick's assistant, Judith, reminds him that it's time for the daily welfare check, starting with Etienne. Having stolen painkillers from the pharmacy, Etienne has already been punished by losing his food rations, a sentence that might cost him his life. Elsewhere, the islanders gather at the supply shop, where food is distributed in strict portions. A small accident disrupts the process. A child knocks over a jar of pickles. Henrik, Beatrice's son, sees an opportunity and suggests his friend donate his food to the boy, a public act of generosity that immediately boosts his ranking. But Henrik's kindness only goes so far. Later, he corners Etienne's wife, Lisa, with an indecent proposal: food in exchange for her compliance. Beatrice warns her son to stay in line, but Henrik believes he is untouchable. Back in the laboratory, a darker truth emerges. Merrick isn't just experimenting with vaccines. He's using test subjects brought from the mainland. Every one of them has died in the process. Meanwhile, Lisa hesitantly approaches Henrik, but their exchange is interrupted by blaring alarms. Unidentified boats are approaching. The island's security leader issues a warning, demanding they turn back. When they hesitate, Henrik doesn't wait for permission. He opens fire, killing them all, even as they retreat. That evening, the islanders gather for the dreaded vote. The man who gave up his food moves up the ranks, and the community must now choose who will take the fall. The decision is made. Etienne is sentenced to die. But before he can meet his fate, Lisa steps forward and exposes Henrik's abuse. To everyone's shock, other women come forward with similar accusations. Beatrice, for all her power, can't protect her son this time. To quell the rising anger, she announces Henrik's exile from the island. The next morning, Linus declares he's leaving for the mainland. His father protests, but Linus refuses to live under his father's shadow any longer. Desperate, Merrick turns to Beatrice, but she refuses to intervene. Her son is being cast out, so why should she help his? The boys get into the boat. Only Henrik is without a protective suit. One of the guards, Heinz, issues a warning. On the mainland, hesitation means death. Fall behind, and you'll become someone's next meal. Back on the island, an unexpected crisis strikes. A major water supply failure. Beatrice orders an investigation into the chief engineer, suspecting something is amiss. When her men search his quarters, they uncover something forbidden, a radio transmitter. Meanwhile, the expedition reaches the ruined city of Herg. Henrik, reluctant to step onto the mainland, tries to stay behind, but Heinz beats him and throws him onto the dock. Meanwhile, The engineer pleads with Beatrix to let his wife come to the island. She gives him a non-committal answer. Elsewhere, the commander leaves Linus waiting in the boat and leads the others through the city ruins for a scheduled meeting with the Count, the man who now rules this part of the mainland. The trade begins. The islanders bring crates of produce, while the Count's men offer up medical supplies scavenged from deserted hospitals. It's a tense but necessary exchange, each side desperate for what the other has. But while the adults are busy bartering, Linus grows impatient. Ignoring orders, he sneaks off the boat and wanders into the city. There, he runs into a boy, roughly his age, who claims to have found a stash of medicines on a ship equipped with a lab. He offers to trade. Linus, intrigued and desperate, listens closely. Linus agrees to go with the strangers, unaware that his squad is already making its way back to the boat. When they arrive at the docks, he's handed an entire box of flu vaccine. But there's a catch. The people want passage to the island in return. Linus insists he doesn't have that kind of authority, and instead proposes an alternative. He'll push for their cause in exchange for the medicine. Before any deal can be finalized, chaos erupts. A gang of desperate slum dwellers ambushes his group. In the scuffle, Heinz's protective mask is torn away, leaving him vulnerable. Fortunately, his comrades jump in and fight off the attackers, giving them just enough time to retreat. They reach the boat, but Linus is nowhere in sight. Faced with no other option, the crew decides to leave without him. Linus sees the boat pulling away and sprints toward it, barely managing to leap aboard. But in the rush, his protective suit tears, a dangerous mistake in their contaminated world. Meanwhile, the man who handed him the vaccine isn't so lucky. He's gunned down before he can make it to safety. Back on the island, the wounded are immediately placed in quarantine. However, Linus secretly hides the vial of vaccine he smuggled from the mainland. Elsewhere, the Count's men inspect the body of the young man who died and discover a vial of the same vaccine clutched in his grasp. Linus, knowing the risks, confesses everything to his father and hands over the stolen medicine. His father, fearing exposure, immediately checks him for symptoms. Heinz, on the other hand, is also taken into quarantine, and it's clear he isn't faring well. Soon after, a telltale rash blooms across his skin, the first sign of infection. Word of Heinz's illness spreads quickly, sending waves of fear through the island's residents. Dr. Mir examines the vaccine Linus brought back and confirms that it's genuine. He's eager to learn more about what's on that ship. But there's a problem. Linus is still under quarantine, making any investigation impossible. When Mir brings this discovery to Beatrix, she orders absolute secrecy, fearing a riot if the truth gets out. Meanwhile, despite the doctor's best efforts, Heinz's condition deteriorates rapidly. Elsewhere, Henrik wanders the abandoned city until he encounters an elderly woman trading food for trinkets. Hoping to barter, he approaches her, but after inspecting his keychain, she refuses to give him anything. Frustrated, Henrik takes a bold step. He removes his clothes, revealing his unblemished, healthy skin. The sight amazes the woman. She hasn't seen an uninfected person in ages. Intrigued, she takes him in. Back on the island, Beatrix unexpectedly extends an offer to Lisa, inviting her to become her assistant. She reassures the girl that she holds no grudges over past actions. The news of Henrik's exile also reaches the island, boosting Beatrix's standing as a fair leader who upholds justice. Meanwhile, for the first time, Merrick allows Judith into the quarantine ward, where she comes face to face with the new arrivals from the mainland. The sight horrifies her. No one else on the island knows these outsiders exist. But with little choice, she begins her work, drawing blood from a young girl for testing. As Murr explains his methods, Judith is unsettled by his cold clinical detachment. In Hamburg, Henrik follows the old woman back to her home, an abandoned theater. She offers him a new set of clothes and insists on disinfecting him with alcohol. However, she warns him not to make the same mistake as her last guest. Back on the island, despite Mayr's relentless efforts, Heinz succumbs to the infection. Shortly after, Linus discovers a rash forming on his own skin. Meanwhile, Henrik asks the old woman to take him to the Count, but she refuses. Enraged, he follows her and uncovers her hidden stash of valuables. In a fit of rage, he beats her to death. Beatrix, seizing the moment, publicly announces Heinz's death and shifts the blame onto the commander. Furious, she condemns the leader for forcing expeditions to the mainland. The younger generation rallies behind her, even faking coughing fits to stoke the flames of panic. Their act sends the adults scattering, disrupting an ongoing vote and diminishing the commander's authority. Capitalizing on this, Beatrix implements a new rule. Parents will now be held responsible for their children's actions. Shortly after, a mother discovers that her daughter is pregnant. In a world where every resource is scarce, an unplanned pregnancy could spell disaster. But despite her mother's desperate pleas, the girl refuses to terminate it. Elsewhere, an engineer secretly tells his wife about an opening on the island following Heinz's death. He vows to do everything he can to bring her there. However, a couple eavesdropping on their conversation decides not to report him. They sympathize. After all, he just wants to be reunited with his family. Back in the laboratory, the quarantined girl's condition worsens. Judith, moved by her suffering, listens as she reveals the cruel truth. Her own brother sold her to the island's authorities. Yet, she holds no resentment, believing she at least served a purpose. Lennis finally shows his father the rash spreading across his skin. Mir isn't surprised. He knew the moment his son returned that he was infected. Lennis, accepting his fate, offers himself for experimentation. But even for Mir, the idea of using his own son as a test subject is too much to bear. Meanwhile, in Hamburg, the Count's men capture a group of young scavengers who came into possession of the medicine Lennis had received. The Count demands to see the ship where the medicine was found, but the group admits that the only person who knew its location is now dead. Unfazed, the Count invites them to join him and assigns them a mission: find the ship. Their leader hesitates before making a bold assumption. The Count's real target is Helgoland, the only place where a doctor might be able to produce a cure. The Count, with a knowing smile, promises nothing, but his intentions are clear. On the island, Mir prepares to study his son, but Lennis makes one final request. He wants his father to promise that he'll find that ship. Later, Mir approaches the former commander, seeking her help to reach the mainland. She agrees, but only on one condition: he must set her free from the prison where she's been unjustly held. Henrik unexpectedly falls into a deadly ambush by a sinister group that preys on humans. Cornered and outnumbered, he has no choice but to reveal his identity. He pleads with his captors, insisting they turn him over to the Count instead of making him their next meal. The cannibals, seeing an opportunity, decide to trade him to the Count in exchange for antibiotics, hoping for a greater reward. The Count, intrigued, agrees to the exchange, believing Beatrix might pay a hefty ransom for Henrik's return. Meanwhile, the engineer manages to contact his wife, informing her of an important interview the next day. He urges her to prepare thoroughly. Back at the Count's stronghold, Henrik is brought before him. The Count makes it clear he knows about the boy's exile. Thinking quickly, Henrik makes an offer. He will reveal the island's defense vulnerabilities, making it ripe for conquest. On the island, the engineer's wife arrives for her interview and successfully passes the first round for the pharmacist position. Meanwhile, Merck keeps a watchful eye on Lennis, whose condition is deteriorating. The next day, the competition narrows to two candidates: the engineer's wife, an experienced pharmacist, and a woman named Daniela, who claims to be a surgeon. The island's leadership convenes to make the final decision. Elsewhere, Eaton stumbles upon a hidden bottle of schnapps and hands it over to the windmill mechanic. As the final testing begins, Daniela impresses the panel with her confident responses, though the pharmacist also performs well. Beatrix calls for a vote, and in the end, Merrick casts the decisive ballot in Daniela's favor. The engineer, devastated, loses control and attacks Merrick, but Beatrix swiftly shuts him down, reminding him that no promises were made. That evening, Daniela arrives on the island. As the welcoming party disperses, an alarming discovery is made. Members of the cannibal gang have secretly boarded the boat and made it to the island. The engineer reaches out to his wife again, but she coldly advises him to move on. Meanwhile, Daniela is shown to her new home. That night, temptation gets the better of the windmill mechanic. He drinks the schnapps, completely oblivious to the engineer sneaking up the windmill and sabotaging one of its blades. The next morning, a recording of the incident reveals what happened. In a drunken haze, the mechanic climbs up to fix the damage but slips and is left hanging with a broken leg. He is rushed to Merrick, who determines the leg must be amputated. When he calls for Daniela's help, she freezes, uncertain of what to do. Suspicious, Merrick and Judith take over the surgery. Afterward, Merrick confronts Daniela, demanding an explanation. She breaks down and admits the truth. She was never a surgeon. In reality, she was a Pilates instructor who memorized a medical textbook to pass the interview. The real reason she is on the island? The Count sent her as a spy, and soon, everything will change. Unbeknownst to them, Judith overhears the entire conversation. She has also been keeping tabs on Merrick's secretive actions regarding his son and now plans to expose everything to Beatrice. But before she can act, Daniela strikes, killing Judith in cold blood. Together, she and Merrick dispose of the body, tossing it into the sea under the cover of night. Later that evening, Lisa tries to reason with Beatrix, urging her to reconsider the harsh new law that punishes parents for their children's actions. But Beatrix is unmoved, firmly asserting her authority. When Judith's absence is noted, Beatrix questions Merrick, but he feigns ignorance. Soon after, the island's police arrest the engineer. At the same time, Lennis's condition takes a turn for the worse, and Merrick is forced to intubate him, fighting to keep him alive. Overcome with emotion, he weeps beside his son's fragile body. However, his duties pull him away when he is summoned to help a woman who has just lost her baby. The grim truth emerges. Her mother, Laura, a healer on the island, was involved. Meanwhile, Beatrix visits the injured windmill mechanic, pressing him for details about Judith's whereabouts. He remembers nothing but pain from the surgery, which frustrates her. Accusing him of negligence, she threatens to exile him. Determined to uncover the truth, she searches the clinic and discovers a dislodged tooth behind the baseboard, a silent clue to a violent struggle. Confronting Merrick, she accuses him of murder. Though he doesn't admit to it, he coldly states that he would have preferred to kill Judith himself. Seizing the opportunity, Beatrix manipulates the situation, deciding to pin the blame on the engineer. He is already a liability, and with his past sabotage of the windmill, she convinces the people that he must have murdered Judith as well. Merrick protests, but Beatrix reminds him of his dying son. Reluctantly, he complies. On the mainland, the Count, now joined by Henrik, rallies his followers, announcing that it is time to set sail for new territory. The next day, the island holds a trial for the engineer. Beatrix ensures that the evidence is stacked against him. His sabotage of the windmill and the bloodstains on his shirt seal his fate. When Merrick refuses to testify, Daniela steps forward, claiming she conducted a DNA test that confirms the blood belonged to Judith. Desperate, the engineer pleads with the islanders, reminding them of his years of loyalty. But the vote is cast, and his fate is sealed. The islanders gather at the shoreline, where the engineer is bound and left at the mercy of the rising tide. His cries for help go unanswered as the water creeps higher. One by one, the crowd disperses, leaving only Merrick behind. He watches in silence, burdened by his own cowardice. Later, he returns to his son's bedside, overwhelmed by guilt. For the first time, he speaks openly to Lennis, reminiscing about the past. He recalls the day everything changed, the day their family was supposed to board the ferry to Helgoland. But fate had other plans. When he and Lennis arrived, they discovered that his wife, Tessa, had been delayed in her laboratory, setting off a chain of events that led them here, to this moment of reckoning. The world was unraveling, and Tessa, an epidemiologist, was at the heart of it. She was working tirelessly to develop an antiviral for the disease sweeping across the globe. Over the phone, she reassured her husband, Merrick, that she was safe within the Institute's secured walls and would join them the next day. Merrick and Lennis arrived on the island, heading straight to the local store. A restless crowd had already formed outside, eager to buy whatever remained on the near-empty shelves. The shopkeeper, overwhelmed and frustrated, refused to let anyone in. Supplies were dwindling, and the next shipment from the mainland wouldn't arrive until morning. Merrick managed to slip inside and found Beatrix working as a senior salesperson. She helped him pick out essentials for his son, and when the commotion at the entrance grew louder, she stepped in to defuse the situation. She assured the desperate crowd that the store would offer significant discounts the next morning, easing tensions just enough for them to disperse. The store owner, however, wasn't pleased with her taking charge, grumbling about her making decisions over his property. What he failed to notice was the silent approval from the staff. Later, Beatrix gathered her coworkers and reminded them of a harsh truth: no one was coming to save them. They had to take control of their own survival. Meanwhile, the community leader approached Merrick with a request. He wanted the doctor to help assess the health of every islander, preparing for the possibility of sealing themselves off from the infected mainland. He even offered Merrick the position of the island's new doctor, as the previous one had fled. Seeking guidance, Merrick called Tessa, but she was still deep in her research and couldn't leave just yet. The next morning, Merrick met with Laura, who had been working as a doctor's assistant, and she introduced him to the island's newly established clinic. As Beatrix tidied up the store, the director arrived and was immediately alarmed by the changes. The windows were taped up, the doors reinforced. Beatrix explained that they needed to secure the store before desperation turned people violent. Furious, the director argued, but Beatrix calmly managed to diffuse his anger, leaving him unsettled but silent. Soon, customers began arriving, but they were met with new rules. No one was allowed inside. Instead, a salesperson stood at the door, collecting lists of requested goods and handing over carefully packed supplies. The sudden shift angered many, and one man attempted to force his way in. Beatrix met his rage with a firm response, warning that the staff was armed and wouldn't tolerate chaos. Shadows moved behind her, figures carrying weapons. The crowd hesitated, then begrudgingly accepted the new order. The troublemaker, however, left, his glare promising he wasn't done yet. That night, Beatrix spotted figures lurking in the darkness outside, but chose not to alert the director, who was still fuming over her leadership. Instead, she manipulated his emotions, sympathizing with his worries about his children still being on the mainland. He stormed off, only to be immediately ambushed by the same troublemaker and his gang. Holding him at gunpoint, they demanded entry, threatening his life if their demands weren't met. Inside, Beatrix gathered the store's employees. They had a choice: let the raiders in and lose everything, or stand their ground and risk the director's life. The vote was swift. No doors would be opened. Delivering the verdict to the attackers, Beatrix's voice remained steady. The troublemaker sneered, pulled the trigger, and executed the director in front of everyone. The gunshot echoed in the stunned silence. Beatrix didn't flinch. She seized the moment, commanding the raiders to drop their weapons. Rattled, they obeyed before scattering into the night. Now, Beatrix had proof of the dangers lurking outside. She armed her people for real and ordered them to hunt down the troublemaker. Her son, still too young to truly grasp the weight of what was happening, silently watched it all unfold. The next day, Beatrix approached the island's chief of police, urging him to establish a self-defense force. When he refused, she revealed the troublemaker, bound and stuffed in the trunk of her car. "This is what's coming," she warned, "and next time, it might be your people." Meanwhile, Merrick visited Beatrix, discovering that she had collected medical supplies from the store after the pharmacy had been looted. She confidently promised him protection, but the doctor was unsettled. Beatrix's shift into an authoritative figure, almost militant in her approach, concerned him. He turned to the community leader, seeking intervention. But when the leader called for a meeting, Beatrix only scoffed at the idea of managing the island without force. The lines had been drawn, and Beatrix wasn't planning on losing control. Beatrix orders the capture of the man who killed the director, revealing his crime to the islanders. With masterful manipulation, she stirs the crowd, driving them to violence. The police stand with her, and the people demand the man's execution. In a swift decision, he's dragged to the shore, where the rising tide silences his cries. As the man drowns, Beatrix stands tall, delivering a speech about how they must forge a new world to survive, a world where morality will one day return. Later, Merrick calls his wife, frantically urging her to flee as a mob storms her institute. He explains the chaos unfolding on the island, while the crowd, convinced of his guilt, massacres everyone in their path. From a distance, Merrick watches in horror as his wife is murdered, powerless to intervene. That same evening, Beatrix visits Laura and proposes a brutal plan to cleanse the island of troublemakers. She points to a promotional calendar on the wall, fixing her eyes on the number 53 as the ideal population for the island. Laura is horrified, but Beatrix, ever calculating, hands her a vial of insulin, ensuring her compliance by threatening her survival if she refuses. The next day, a grim sight appears on the shore. Dozens of bodies, tossed into the ocean, wash up on the island. Beatrix and Laura, using the infected blood from these bodies, begin injecting the islanders with what they claim are vaccines. Some die instantly, sparking rumors of a deadly infection spreading across the island. When Beatrix and Laura ask Merrick to help with testing, his grief over his wife's death doesn't stop him from joining them. As the days pass, Beatrix and Laura begin to announce the names of the infected. Merrick soon realizes that these are the same people who opposed Beatrix's leadership. She reminds him that only 513 people are meant to survive on the island, pushing him further into his reluctant role in finding a cure. One fateful night, the supposed infected are gathered onto a ferry and sent off to the unknown, leaving their fate to the ocean. Watching the ferry depart, Beatrix tells Merrick and Laura that today marks a step toward their salvation. Merrick vows to find the vaccine, but he knows Beatrix will answer for all of this one day. Back in the present, Merrick asks his son for forgiveness, but the boy, nearing death, tells him to leave. In his final moments, Merrick records a confession, planning to expose the truth to the islanders. But Daniela, holding a weapon, interrupts and destroys the cassette, reminding him that the Count is coming, and soon everything will change. She then reveals that she is pregnant, unwilling to bring a child into a world where cannibalism is a reality. On the mainland, the Count and Henrik witness the arrival of a modern laboratory and supplies, confirming that Merrick will soon have the resources he needs to create a cure. Meanwhile, Beatrix enjoys a swim in the pool, unaware that the ship carrying the much-needed supplies is already on its way to the island. In a chilling turn, a local priest becomes the latest victim of cannibals who have infiltrated the island. The story doesn't offer much in terms of inventive concepts, but it's the speed at which humanity's moral compass crumbles that leaves an impact. A world ravaged by disease mirrors our own, yet it's the swift breakdown of social order, where survival trumps all, that stands as the true horror. In a place where normal human behavior slips away, the fight for survival becomes a dangerous game of justifying the unjustifiable. The first season of this movie ends here with 7 episodes. When the next season comes out, I'll upload it. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe to our channel.